Welcome back. Syria's rebel leader has promised an inclusive country and insisted there's no need for the West to panic. The leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is apparently mid-rebrand as he tries to cast himself as a reformed jihadist. So who is Ahmed al-Sharaa, better known by his nom de guerre, Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani? His journey as a jihadist began in Iraq in the early 2000s. He was linked to al-Qaeda through the Islamic State of Iraq, a precursor to ISIS. Al-Jawlani was sent to Syria in 2011 to establish al-Nusra Front, a faction tied to the Islamic State. Supposedly disagreeing with their violent tactics, he pledged his group to al-Qaeda in 2013. But in their first year, the group claimed nearly 600 attacks across Syria, including more than 40 suicide attacks. 3 years later, al-Jawlani also severed ties with al-Qaeda. He eventually rebranded the group as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, in 2017. Under al-Jawlani, HTS became the dominant force in Idlib, northwest Syria's largest rebel stronghold. Secure there, he made a serious push to transform his image. He established a civilian front, the Syrian Salvation Government, to promote stability in the region. But critics compare his strong authoritarian rule in Idlib to Assad's. It was from there that forces launched the 28th of November toppling of Assad's regime. So how believable is this latest transformation? I'm joined now by Aaron Wieselen, a terrorism expert and senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, who's an expert on HTS. Welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining us. An expert on Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and therefore an expert on Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani. I wonder if, first of all, can talk about his rebrand. Why the change of name and what does that tell us about his aims and objectives?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen him and the group pivot a number of times going back to the beginning of the Syrian uprising. The way I describe it best is they essentially went from global jihad to a local regime. So even if they haven't been associated with, say, al-Qaeda now for 8 years or so, they still have ruled northwest Syria as an authoritarian government.
So who is Jawlani?
Well, some say that he's Machiavellian, others say he might be a chameleon. I think that there's a lot of debate, and there's a lot of things, even those that have followed this closely don't even know the answer to at this point because this is totally unprecedented in many respects. And so far, while there have been a lot of talks of this inclusiveness, those involved in the caretaker government, as they call it, are still the key leaders that have been a part of his organization and civilian government going back the last 7 years, and not anybody else.
And how genuine would you say his rebrand is? I mean, he's been a violent Islamist in the past, affiliated to al-Qaeda, to ISIS. How certain can the people of Syria be that he has changed and he is who he says he is now?
Well, I think it's genuine to say that he's no longer related to ISIS or Al Qaeda. Since then, he's taken out all of the Islamic State cells that have been in the territory that he's helped control. And then when Al Qaeda tried to create a new branch in Syria in 2018, by June 2020, he dismantled that group. So that's legitimate. The greater question is more how they rule the future of Syria, because in the past, it's only been a male and elite led operation. You haven't seen women involved in the government or minorities.
And the people of Syria, we saw them out on the streets celebrating the fall of Assad. But how sure can they be that their future is safe in the hands of HTS?
I think it's a question that many people still have. I don't think we can be sure one way or the other at this point. I think many people have a lot of hope and are creating a honeymoon phase in many respects. And yet it could also just be a continuation of what we've already seen in northwest Syria the last 7 years.
Now, we know that across the world internationally, HTS is branded as a prescribed terrorist organisation, countries like the United States of America and the United Kingdom. How concerned are HTS by that branding? Is it something that they will seek to change? Do they care?
Well, we saw Jalani himself actually calling for the U.S. to remove his group and him from the terrorism list back in 2020. Of course, that hasn't happened yet. And I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, at least from the U.S. perspective. It's more plausible that there will be easing of sanctions related to Syria as a country due to the Assad regime's rule. And therefore, they might not worry too much about the terrorism designation in the near term.
We know that the US is already worried about Syria potentially becoming a breeding ground for terrorists, and various groups are at play within the country. How correct are they in that assumption? I mean, what's your analysis in that respect? Is it likely that there are going to be very many different factions fighting for power?
I mean, I think the main threat right now is the potential for the Islamic State to reemerge. It's continued to do small scale attacks the last 5 years since it lost territory. However, there continues to be 10,000 male ISIS members imprisoned in northeast Syria. So if the fighting continues between the different factions in the northeast that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, that could create, a possibility that ISIS could try and break them out, which obviously would not be ideal for anybody in Syria or the region.
And what we've heard so far from Jawlani, as you've alluded to, is that he's saying that all Syrians are safe under his rule. All factions, all minorities are going to be treated equally. We've seen thus far that he's encouraged people not to seek vengeance on those who perhaps were part of the previous regime and are still in Syria, that everybody should come together for the new Syria. Can he be believed?
Well, in the last 2 weeks, overall, things have been fine. We really haven't seen too much revenge. I mean, there have been some cases of vigilantism here or there, but overall, most people that I've talked to on the ground suggest that it's more or less the same as it had been prior to the fall of the regime. But it's also been, a very short amount of time, and they say that there's this transition until March 1st. So I think we need to continue to track what they're saying versus what the realities are on the ground, and make sure that there isn't a difference.
Indeed. Aaron Zelen, thank you very much for speaking to us this evening on The World. Thank you.
Thanks.